Hello everyone, my name is Arne Brasseur, also known online as Plexus. You can find me on Mastodon at plexus at toot.cat. And I am the main author of the Lambda Island libraries for Clojure, and also the founder of the Guy1 Clojure consultancy. So today I want to talk about Launchpad, which is one of our open source projects we are most proud of. We use it every day on basically every single project. And for being such a pivotal tool in our toolbox, we feel like it's not widely known yet and perhaps a little misunderstood. So I hope with this video I can show some people the power and benefits of Launchpad and maybe clear up some of the confusion. So we call Launchpad a dev environment launcher. And so especially in the context of Clojure, you have to understand that Clojure is typical for a Lisp, but atypical for most other language development these days, is that the development process is very interactive. So you normally have a single process which runs both your main application, say it's an application server which serves web requests, but then inside that same process there's a REPL, typically a networked REPL, which you connect to from your editor so that you can actually evaluate code as you go along. Inside that same process you can define functions, variables, redefine things, inspect things, and sort of very dynamically communicate with your program as you're building it. So this is pivotal to the Clojure experience, and so you always need some way to start that process, get it connected to your editor, so you can start working. And your editor, I'm using Emacs. Emacs is commonly used in the Clojure world because it has a Lisp heritage, but Emacs has a steep learning curve. VS Code is also popular, has an excellent Clojure plugin called Calva. People use Vim. There's a couple different Clojure plugins for Vim. The main one I see people use these days is Clojure, which I believe is for NeoVim. Of course, the Clojure integration is called Cider, and then the final editor, which quite a few people use in the Clojure world, is IntelliJ. And the IntelliJ plugin for Clojure is called Cursive. And so you, more than with most other languages, like say for JavaScript, you're usually fine with just something that gives you syntax highlighting and maybe some completion or LSP support. But for Clojure, you really need something a little bit more advanced and interactive. Okay. So Dev Environment Launcher starts that main process, including your networked REPL, as well as anything else that you might need. And that's sort of, and I'll get to that towards the end when I talk about the one-stop shop. Besides that Clojure process, you might want to start, some Docker containers, or run an npm install first for your Clojure script build. Maybe also run a Clojure script build. Maybe check if certain environment variable secret keys are available, or pull those secrets in from somewhere if you're using like some development secret management and so forth. So the idea is that all of this is basically a single command that does it all. That's the same command on every single project, so you always know how to start it, know where it is. Giving still enough ways to customize it to your own needs. So we don't want to take liberties away from developers. We want to empower developers. And so the idea is that with Launchpad, on a project level, you set up everything that everyone tends to need, but then people can sort of layer in their additional needs or their variations in what they're doing or what they're working on in a given day. But enough talk. Let's actually see what Launchpad looks like. So I created a new directory here for demonstration purposes. I'm going to create a couple files for starters. I'm going to create my deps Eden, which is the main Clojure the dependencies file, something like a package JSON. I'm I'm also going to create a BB. BB stands for Babashka, which is an alternative Clojure interpreter, which starts much faster. So Clojure sits on top of Java and the JVM, which is extremely powerful. It has just-in-time compilation, which speeds up your program the longer it runs, can do all kinds of fancy stuff. But you pay a cost in that starting up takes a little bit of time. Also, Clojure is a dynamic language. That means that most code runs from source. So that means that you start Java, you load the Clojure compiler, and then the Clojure compiler starts loading Clojure sources and compiling them on the fly, and then evaluating the compiled code. And so that all takes time. And so for scripting purposes, for anything that sort of these one-off things that you start from the command line, we tend to use Babashka. Clojure itself, what you do is the startup cost is not a huge issue, because you start a single process and that process is long running, and then you communicate with it through your REPL. And that's exactly what we're going to get to today. So there's Clojure, and then there's Babashka, and so I have both of these installed. Those are prerequisites for using Launchpad. Okay, now we're going to get to the heart of the story, which is the bin Launchpad script. And I still had it here from my earlier recording, but I'll just quickly retype this and in meanwhile tell you a little bit about what I'm doing. So I'm using user bin env just because I can't assume where exactly Babashka is installed on the system, but as long as it's on the class path, this should be able to find it. Then I'm going to require lambda island launchpad as launchpad. And then I'm going to start launchpad main, for now just with the default, no options. So this is the standard entry point for Launchpad. That is bin Launchpad. Basically any Launchpad compliant project, you can see that they support Launchpad by having a bin Launchpad file, and then by running that, you know that you should be able to get your environment up and running without having to go through a README and read the 17 different steps of how to get to a working environment. Now in this case, it's not finding Launchpad yet because Babashka doesn't know about Launchpad yet. So I'm going to add that here as a dependency. That's com lambda island. Do I have it here? Let's just do this. Launchpad. It has a certain version, which right now I can see in our changelog is 0.28.129-alpha. All right, and now I can start bin Launchpad. And so this is going to start Clojure at a certain port, certain nREPL port. It tells me when I'm done, or at least nREPL tells me when it's done. And now I can, from my editor, connect to this port. So let's open a file here, source launchpad demo.clj. Yeah, that's still here from earlier. Why is this buffer read only? Yes, okay, obviously. Okay, can I save this? Yes, okay. So if I connect, so this is, let's actually do the full command. I can type cider I swear I can type cider connect or cider connect clj, comma cc in Corgi, which is the Emacs configuration I'm using, localhost. It can pick up which port it's using because I'm in the same project. And so here Corgi shows me that I have a Clojure REPL connected. So I can start evaluating stuff. But there's a couple things here. First of all, Cider tells me that there's some nREPL middleware that we're missing to have all its functionality, and also that I need a CLJ refactor or a refactor nREPL middleware so that CLJ refactor can work properly. And also that manual step of having to connect is not ideal, because people might be used to being able to just say Cider check in, and then Cider will do this starting for you and automatically connect. And so we should be able to do better by saying bin launchpad dash emacs. So dash emacs is actually an alias for 3 different options that you can pass: dash cider nREPL, refactor nREPL, and cider connect. So this adds these 2 middlewares to your nREPL setup, and then instructs Emacs to connect back. So now we are automatically connected without having to do that manual connect step. There you go. Right, so we have that dev environment. We have that well-known entry point. This is important. We have the same thing with bin culture. People often have some other way already to set up commands in a project, like, you know, maybe there's a make file or a just file or babashka tasks. Please still add these bin files. It is part of the UI of these projects, and so it's important that people can find those. And so now why do we need to create this bin launchpad? If this is all it is, then it could be a global command. But here you can customize this for the specific project. So let's say that you know, this project requires to add specific Java arguments. Then we can say Java arg, you know, d, you know, and add some property. And there's a bunch of different things we can do. We can also set extra nREPL middleware. We can add additional steps, additional things that need to happen before or after. Like we can, for instance, check that we're using the right Java version. And I'll get to a bunch more of those things. And there's a fairly complete list in the README. But to explain all this, we first need to explain a little bit more about the other things that Launchpad does. So the thing is, like, if it was just this, okay, you know, like you've given me an alternative to cider check in, that's not that exciting. But Launchpad also gives you access to a bunch of development tools and affordances. And so that means that rather than, you know, either each person sort of locally for them figuring out how to set up and configure these tools and have them in a way that they're handy for them, or having to do it on every single project, it's basically baked into Launchpad, and people get a very high-level way of accessing these things. So we've already talked about some of the nREPL middlewares. There's some other ones like Said and debug REPL, and I'll show you how you can actually set those up so that, like, if you like to use those, that they're automatically available on any project where you use Launchpad. But the next interesting one is deps reloading. So like I said, you know, because Clojure is not always the fastest to start, and especially if your project itself is quite heavy, if it loads a lot of dependencies, does a lot of things on startup, you know, it can take a minute or more before you're, you know, fully set up and warmed up. So in this case, it really pays off to not have to restart your REPL process for every little thing. Now, say you're, you know, like, especially if you're still in the early stages of a project, you might be quite regularly adding dependencies or changing dependency versions, trying things out, removing them again. And so one of the nice things with Launchpad is that you can do that without having to restart your process. So if I say this, version, I'm just going to say release. That should give me the latest version. So it says here reloading deps Eden, and it added Regal. So now I can go to my Launchpad demo file and require launch, no, not Launchpad, Lambda Island, Regal SR, let's say. And what does Regal have for me? Is it regex? Yeah, for instance. I think we can do something like this. Yeah, it's been a while that I've used Regal, but you get the point. Now, at this point, I want to talk about another little thing. Besides deps Eden, Launchpad has this convention of having .local files. So, because your deps Eden, obviously, it gets checked in. But the idea is that you can also create a deps.local.eden, which does not get checked in. And so here, if I say, instead of adding it here in my deps Eden, if I just want to try it out and not really add it to the repository yet, I can add it here. And so Launchpad picks that up just the same as well. Now, what's nice about this too is that, say I have it here as a first class dependency, but now I'm actually making some changes to Regal. So, and this is quite common, especially in companies, bigger setup. You're dealing with multiple repositories. You might have internal dependencies or third-party dependencies which you're contributing to. And so you want to be able to kind of smoothly work on them and switch back and forth between your local source version and the release version. So here I'm back in my deps local Eden, and if I say here Regal local root, I should have it under home Arna GitHub lambda island Regal. So now this thing, the jar file, the released file of Regal is no longer on the class path, but Regal's source and resources directory are. So now if I reload this and I navigate to this source, you can see that now I'm actually in that local checkout. And so I can make changes here, load, evaluate these namespaces, and so forth. I can also link this to my existing REPL to make that extra smooth. So that's a nice thing, and this is powered by Lambda Island class path, because it's not trivial to do these kind of class path manipulations, especially if the process started with, say a Maven version of a certain things. It takes a bit of workarounds to get to the point where you can actually say no, like this one takes precedence now. So this is handled for you. Now, besides deps reloading, we also have .env support. So deps reloading is powered by Lambda Island ClassPod. If you're really only interested in that thing itself and not the whole package, then you can just use that. Env reloading is powered by Lambda Island.env. So here the idea is that if I create a .env file here, and you know what these look like, right? This is this kind of like shell format. Optionally, they can have this export here, but they don't have to. Then the Launchpad will see that and first of all make those environment variables available as first-class environment variables to any process that gets started by Launchpad. So say, and this gets to the one-stop shop. Say part of your setup is that you need, say like a Postgres container or a MySQL container, and you have something here, like DB user and DB password. You can make sure that those are available to both that database server process and your Clojure process. And here too, you can create a .env.local, the same format. It overrides any variables here, obviously, which in turn overrides any values actually coming from the actual environment. But so this one .env is intended to be checked in, and .env.local is intended to be, just local setup. So if you have, say, like API keys that are just for you, they shouldn't be checked in, that's the place to put them. Now, not everyone, like wants to use environment variables, and that's fine. There is ways to plug into Launchpad's watcher. So if you have, say, a config Eden, you can also sort of have watching on that and hot reloading with minimal effort. Now, what's cool about this, and what's cool about some of the stuff we've done with this environment variable stuff, is that this is actually dynamically picked up by the process. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to work. Yeah, this might require a restart because these files didn't exist when we started. Let's see, what else do I have here? DB user. Oh yeah, no, these actually did get picked up. I'm not sure where that XXX came from. ABC. So this is now 1, 2, 3. Oh. And if I say here ABC is 4, 5, 6, then that should replace that. So that's neat. That's something you get. Now let's actually talk a little bit more about configuring Launchpad. So I had to pass --emacs here, and there's a couple different things you can do here. Now, besides these flags, you can add aliases. So let's say that in my deps Eden, I have a aliases def, which adds def to the path. Right? You can start Launchpad with def, and that will enable that alias. Now, if you always want to run with the def alias and with --emacs, you can, in your deps local Eden, do some configuration. And so I have these here. So there's a couple different keys you can set up. I'm also, let's see, there's also this one. Yeah, so these 4 are all keys that can either go in your deps local Eden. So this is basically local setup inside your project for that specific project. Doesn't get checked in, but it allows you to keep it there. And if you do want to save it, maybe you symlink it to like a private Git repo. But yeah, that's for you. If you want these things to be basically set up every single time you use Launchpad, regardless of which project, then you can set them in your home directory in your .clojure deps Eden. Same thing. Now let's look at what some of these do. So main ops and options are similar. Main ops came first, and really gives you raw command line arguments that you basically always want to pass. So if I do this, that basically means that I want to run with the --emacs command line flag and with the def alias. So now bin Launchpad, without anything else, picks those things up. Now that raw command line syntax is not super elegant. So for these different Boolean flags, there's also an option to just pass a map, basically. So we can do something like this. Emacs true, portal true. I'll talk about portal in a second, and then aliases def. Now, actually, I'm going to leave def off here just to demonstrate something else. And actually, let me here add a second test alias. No. there we want to add lambda island Clojure. Okay, so in this case, it reloaded my Dapsiden, but there wasn't much that happened there. Now, if I here say, say I add test here, now it's actually gonna pick up that now the test alias has been enabled, and I now have Clojure available on my class path. And same if I add def, I have now. So this is something very neat and something you can't really do with anything else. Is sort of like add aliases to a running process. Shadow build IDs, this gets into Shadow CLJS integration. So the whole idea is, and so Portal and Shadow, this already shows you that, like, beyond just starting the Clojure process, Launchpad wants to be like a gateway into common developer tools, the kind of thing that you might, set up in each project individually and configure in each project individually, sort of give you a very easy way to, access those wherever you are. So let's say, yeah, so some of these you can't enable, so this does not get picked up. I do need a restart for that. But so now I've started with the portal flag, and that does two things. It adds the portal dependency, so that that's available, but it also defines already a helper for starting portal. So there's a pattern that we tend to use in a lot of projects, that inside our user CLJ we have an atom which holds the portal reference, and then a portal function which starts portal. And so if you use a portal flag to Launchpad will check if those things exist. If you already have a portal function in your user CLJ, then we don't touch that. But if you don't have that, then we define that for you. So now I should be able to say user portal, and there's my portal, and I can start tapping values and inspecting them. I don't know if you're not familiar with Portal. It's a very cool tool for inspecting values in all kinds of different ways. All right, talked about a lot of different things already. Yeah, let's maybe quickly look at these custom watchers. So Launchpad has an API where you can tap into its own watchers. This is Lambda Island Launchpad Watcher Watchbang. Now, this might only be available during development time, or if you started through Launchpad. Otherwise, Launchpad won't be on the class path. So that's why this is wrapped inside this try catch. Now, what watch basically gives you is just a function where you give it a path, some file you want to watch, and then some function that responds to that watching, and you actually get a map here with information about which file, whether it was a change or a new file or something like this. Because the thing is that, like, these watcher libraries, they use operating system functionality for watching the file system, and this actually, like, on the operating system, most of the time on most operating systems, this works on a directory level, not on a file level. So you basically need to subscribe to events on the directory and then filter out which files you need. Now, some of these higher level libraries do allow you to listen to a specific file, but they'll register a new watcher basically for every single time you call it. And usually, like in a case like this, there's multiple files within the project directory and within subdirectories within the project directory which we might be watching. And so if you register a watcher for each of those directories, because some of those directories are nested inside each other, you're going to start getting a lot of duplicate events, and it's just not very efficient. So what Launchpad does instead is it always has a single watcher registered for each top level directory. For each, like, if you have nested directories, it filters those out, and then as those events comes in, it sees like which of these handlers are relevant and dispatches those. And so say that, you know, we don't really like using environment variables too much for our general configuration. Instead, we have a config.eden and then a config local.eden for local overrides, again, a file you don't really check in. Then we can do something like this, have a function that handles, you know, whatever reloading needs to happen, and boom, you know, in our dev environment, we now have hot reloading of this configuration stuff. Okay, I've already talked about a lot of stuff. I think there's two main things that are still worth touching upon. One is monorepo and multi-repo support, and the other is shadow CLJS support. And they actually tie in a little bit with each other. And then I guess, yeah, there's still the whole aspect of actually customizing Launchpad for whatever else, you know, setup and startup needs you have inside a project. So let me go here to a project of ours, Slack widgets. So we have a deps Eden here. And this is an older project, you know, before we had, for instance, Portal inside Launchpad. But I've updated some of the stuff to be a little bit more already sort of idiomatic Launchpad usage. And so this is a a monorepo, so to say. So we basically have backend, right, which has its own deps Eden and its sources. And then we have a front end, which has a shadow CLJS, a deps Eden, package.json for our npm dependencies. And so sometimes you'll be working on one of them, sometimes you'll be working on the other, sometimes you're working on both at the same time. And especially, you know, say you're working on a laptop or, you know, some older machine that isn't the most powerful, it's usually not desirable to run too many different JVM processes. If we can keep that all in a single process, that would be splendid. So if I say bin not CLJ Slack widgets, if I say bin Launchpad, yeah, so right now it starts without any options. But so say I start bin Launchpad backend. Right, so now it's going to add that backend extra deps, which adds Slack widgets backend as a local root. So that just adds that directory. Now Launchpad picks this up that this is, you know, because this is a local root and that local root directory contains its own deps Eden, we also immediately get hot reloading on this deps Eden. So say I'm here, I'm adding Lambda Island, Regal, then it picks that up just the same. Now say I add front end here, some interesting things happen. First of all, you see that we run pnpm, and there you already see some of the customization you can do. And then Clojure gets started, and it immediately kicks off a shadow CLJS build. So let's look at our deps Eden again. So here, the front end alias defines the extra dependency that points to the front end sub project. But it also contains this shadow build IDs. And so you see that one, if you go to front end shadow CLJS Eden, that's this build ID right here. And so basically, like what Launchpad will do is find any sub-project that you're pointing to that has a shadow CLJS Eden, merge those all in, so you get a single shadow CLJS project definition with these different builds, so it does pay off to have unique build IDs, and then start the ones that need starting. And if I do this now with --emacs, it's actually also going to connect both a Clojure REPL and the Clojure script REPL. So let me maybe demonstrate that. Again, I do know how to type. So this should, basically do the whole thing, give me a Clojure and a Clojure script REPL. If you have multiple builds you're starting, then it'll connect a Clojure script REPL to each of those, unless you specify differently. So we do have a flag if you, so we needed this because we were working on Chrome extension development, which contains multiple builds, some of which are not able to support a REPL because you don't have access to eval in that restricted environment. So in that case, we can specify only start all these, but only connect a REPL on these. And you can, I think, check the docs for that. So this is Monorepo. So there the typical setup is, a deps eden and a bb eden and a bin launchpad at the top level, with aliases pointing at your different sub-projects, and so you can like easily switch between them, switch across them. Of course, that does mean that because we're loading all of those sub-projects in the same Clojure process, they're not strictly isolated. In particular, if they have different versions of dependencies, then it's going to resolve to one of them, probably the newest. So that's something to be aware of. Now, we mostly consider that a benefit in that it's usually desirable to like keep those versions somewhat aligned across projects. And so this way, you sort of get a check on that early on, if those start giving you trouble or not. And of course, if necessary, you can like more strictly separate them later on, or run multiple Launchpad processes if you want to keep them separate. This is just the nature of the thing, something you need to be aware of. There's one more flag I haven't talked about here, which is --go, which is just using the convention. And again, this is another well-known entry point. So in pretty common setup is to have a dev directory with a user CLJ file, and to in that user CLJ file have a go function, which basically starts your main process. So this is a convention going way back to Chestnut and other application templates, and a lot of us still do this on every single project, so that you just kind of know, like, okay, if I just want to start, the main application server, I just need user go. And so, again, in the spirit of sort of one-stop shop, I can here configure this, say, okay, run with --emacs and --go, and now this is going to immediately start my application server as well. And because I've put it there in my deps local Eden, I don't have to think about it anymore. It's basically there, for the rest of the lifetime of me working on that project. Okay, to wrap it up, let's quickly look at this one's bin launchpad. This already gets a little bit more interesting. Actually, before we get into this one, Emacs is frozen for a second while it connects. There we are. There's another one I would like to show, which is this one. So here you see that, like, basically Launchpad works in steps. So if you look at the source of Launchpad, Launchpad, there you go. You see here we define before steps, after steps. So there's in the middle, there's starting the actual Clojure process. But before we get there, we need to collect a bunch of information, prepare a bunch of things. So that's all these before steps. Read the deps eden, handle CLI arguments, find a free end REPL port, and so forth. inject any dependencies and middleware that are needed based on flags, configure the watchers, start shadow, which most of these actually, like say something like start shadow build. It doesn't actually start the shadow build. It sets some stuff up so that when the Clojure process starts, it injects a bunch of additional parameters. Yeah, here my dash go started the process, which I haven't run in a while. It's getting events, which it seems to have some trouble with. That's fine. That's not what this is about. But so if I say here verbose, then you actually see the Clojure command it generates. And so it adds some common Java flags, for instance, this mid stack trace and fast throw, which is really helpful so you don't get missing stack traces. Some additional properties, it sets up your aliases, it injects a bunch of additional dependencies. Like Launchpad itself, because we need some runtime support. Shadow in this case, because it noticed that we had that shadow build ID, so we need shadow. And this will take the version from your deps Eden. Unless it's not there, then it takes a hard-coded version that's set in Launchpad. So this is, with most of these tools, say you ask for Said. If we find that you already have Said as a dependency, then we'll just use that version. But if you don't specify it, then we will put one for you. So if you don't have it, it's always there. With Cider and Refactor and REPL, it's a little different. We actually, if we are able to communicate with Emacs via Emacs client, we ask Emacs, what's the version of Cider you're using, and inject that one. So that's basically our custom deps. With additional aliases and so forth. Is basically a merge of your deps and deps local. And then we get to a little -e here. So then it runs a bunch of code on startup. And so some of these steps basically add additional bits of code to this, to add additional watch handlers, and so forth to write a CP cache file, which we can read later. And then eventually start and REPL itself with the given middleware. So now you know a lot about Launchpad. The README could use some love, and I'll try to improve it over time, but already tried to document the most important things. So these are all additional things you can specify. Now a couple of them are important. Actually, I don't have the pre and post steps yet in here, do I? No. So this used to be how you had to do it, like basically make yourself a full list of all the steps and pass that in if you wanted to customize the steps. Now we have some additional things you can use, in particular pre-steps. Let's see, am I using that here? Yeah. So you can just say, okay, these need to run basically in before the main Clojure process, and then you don't need to repeat everything else. Here you can see some additional stuff we're doing. So we're like running npm install, running docker up, running MySQL to initialize some stuff. Remember that anything from .env gets passed to any process, so that's where this stuff comes from. And then we start the actual Clojure process, pass some additional Java arguments. We have this wait for MySQL to be available. So this is a bit of an API that Launchpad gives you to give these additional things. In this case, we've customized that a little bit more, basically saying if you don't have pnpm installed, then we're just going to install it for you and then tell you to try again once it's been installed. Or if not, then yeah, we run pnpm. And if you're not familiar with pnpm, it's basically a version of npm that uses symlinks and so is much better at reusing packages. So you'll see that this only adds like milliseconds. See, it's already done. milliseconds to your startup, so that makes it tractable to just do it on like every single call. That's mostly it. When you're not doing Monorepo, but instead you have a project that's split across a bunch of repos, what you can do is set up a special repo. I typically call it dev REPL. And then in there, you basically do something like this: local root, dot dash backend, dot dash frontend. And so then any common tooling and setup can go into that dev REPL project, and you can from there start your REPL, with some combination of these other projects. So I find that like different dev teams tend to be either lumpers or splitters. Either they like to add everything to a big monorepo, or they have a tendency to split things across lots and lots of tinier repos. So whichever style you are, Launchpad should be able to serve your needs just fine. So long explanation. I hope that was helpful. I'm not sure how long I ran. I guess we'll see when the video uploads. If you have questions or comments, there's the Lambda Island channel on Clojure Slack, or feel free to email me. That's arne at lambdaisland.com. And till next time.